Hi, good afternoon. I have learned a lot today and maybe sweated off a pound or two in this room. This is about higher education at a crossroads, so I thought we would table set by describing the crossroads that higher education is at. If you would all take a minute, just introduce yourself, and then I'll lay into that a little bit.
Alex Cartwright, I'm the president of the University of Central Florida.
Tade Mitchell, the president of the American Council on Education.
Jennifer Mnookin, Chancellor at UW-Madison. Really happy to be with all of you today.
I'm Tade Oyerinde. I'm the founder and chancellor of Campus, a new two-year online institution.
Thank you. So this crossroads, I think of this as sort of 5 buckets, and I'm going to lay it out, and I'm going to ask you guys to add to it what I'm missing. So we just had this horrific assassination, which is really a symptom, I think, broadly of the polarization which everybody has to deal with on college campuses, and how to deal with that is not easy. And the schadenfreude that we're seeing on the back end of that is tough to watch. But it does speak to where things are, at least at the extremes of the poles. And this is something that universities, not since Vietnam, but probably worse now since it's more student on student that schools have to deal with. That obviously bleeds into classrooms. Students don't trust each other. They have a hard time speaking. There's anemic discussions. Kids aren't reading as much. There's TikTok and AI, so attention spans are down. There's depression. There's lack of critical thinking. The business model is in trouble for traditional higher education. ROI is uneven. The student debt's $1.7 trillion. Enrollment is declining, and this, of course, is leading to a decline in confidence. So there's sort of a cycle happening. And of course, the customer base is not being born, right? There's a big demographic cliff that everybody has to deal with. And we have a president who's pushing on international students and creating instability with research. So this is another big issue for universities right now. And finally, in order to handle these big issues, we have a system of governance that may be deliberative, but shared governance is not nimble. And so handling these problems within the university system takes a little bit of fancy footwork. So what did I miss? What else is your
Nothing.
problem right now?
I think you did a good
We're
summary.
sure you got it all.
Yeah.
Great to see you all.
Exactly.
You did a good summary.
All right, well, let's talk first then about the polarization. This is a cultural issue that lands on your doorstep, but it is your doorstep, and there is responsibility you have as leaders. What do you do to try to take the temperature down? It's kind of a bad phrase, but to ease up on and get people to speak to each other, understand that it's okay to disagree without being canceling each other or being violent.
Yeah, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'll just give a couple quick things. One, it all starts with leadership. And you have to think about how do you position what it is you're trying to do as an institution. In Florida, we're lucky because we actually have a lot of built-in emphasis on civil discourse, on civic engagement. We actually, all of our universities have, an office of civil discourse and engagement. We have an office of public policy. We're expected to host events during the semester where we get people to actually have different views and to talk about those things. With all of that, I think we still realize we need to do even more. Because as I said, I think the important thing is for our society, for everything we're trying to accomplish, we need to be educating people about how to be great citizens. And that is something that we work on. And I will say that if you look, it's when people come in, what we want to do is make sure they're introduced to these concepts as early as possible. Orientation.
Kindergarten, maybe?
That'd be great. No, that would be great.
Right.
It should start very early about what we're trying to do. And then we need to go through. So in our part, we believe that we just got to continue to try to infuse it in everything we do, so that they're always being exposed to it, because that's how you get people to be comfortable with what's possible. Last thing I'd say, is my belief is really that, my mom told me a long time ago that, and I still remember this. She said, she's passed now, but she's always had these great phrases. She said, you can learn something from everybody, and your job is to figure out what it is you can learn from that person.
It's a great saying. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have how many members? 1,500? You must hear a lot of things that are working.
1,500. I talked to a lot of presidents. A lot of my friends are presidents, and I think the thing that we need to say right up front is that the murder was horrific, and there's no excuse for it. We're trying to find an explanation for it. but it shouldn't happen anywhere, anytime, to anyone. And I think that that's what our presidents have been trying to say to their communities. So, Doug, I think you are right. Colleges are caught up in this. We are no better, no worse than other parts of society that are so polarized that violence seems to be a solution. It's not a solution, but I think we can be the solution, and we're working on it. And I guess I want to say a couple more things to maybe deepen, Doug, what you were talking about. Colleges and universities should be about the business of creating democratic citizens. Democratic citizenry demands the articulation and the understanding of other points of view, the argumentation around what's true, what's the best path, all of that. We try to do that. We're not as good at it as we need to be. We'll talk more about why that is in a moment or two. But let's remember that we're asking colleges to do something that's pretty remarkable, which is to take, in the case of traditional institutions, 18 to 22-year-olds who have grown up in the most segregated neighborhoods since the Civil Rights Movement, who have gone to the most segregated schools since Brown, and who are convinced by social media to live in silos that self-consciously isolate and divide. Welcome to college. And we now expect you to be able to talk with respect and understand people you've never dealt with before. That's a heavy, heavy burden. And I think, I'll say it, I think we've been taken by surprise by, in last spring, by the vitriol and the anger between student groups who really didn't know how to have civil discourse, which is why it's so important for institutions to tackle it as a, if not job one, certainly job 1A.
Okay.
I would agree with a lot of what my co-panelists have already said. I mean, what happened to Charlie Kirk was a tragedy. It was wrong. Nobody should ever experience violence because of their beliefs and their words. And the fact that it happened on a college campus is even a step worse, because college campuses should be part of the places within society where ideas are explored and bump up against each other, and the ways that we should be disagreeing with each other should never include what happened there. And I think it is a call to all of us to double down on the importance of what we are doing on our campuses to encourage our students and our faculty to learn to disagree better, to learn to engage with one another, to learn from one another, not because we want anything to be a monoculture, but because we want we want our campuses to be places where people are getting challenged in ways that sometimes change their mind and sometimes sharpen the view that they already had. Both of those are good things, and those can only happen if we have vibrant exchange of ideas done, we hope, civilly and with civic engagement on our campuses. I think there is more of that happening on our campuses than sometimes we get credit for. And at the same time, I think we need a lot more of it than what we have right now. So I think both of those things are true. And I hope that this can be a collective moment of reflection for depolarization as well, in order to, social media at the fringes, all kinds of things happen. That shouldn't be people's lived realities on our campus. I would agree very vehemently with what Ted said as well about students come to us already shaped by their communities and their belief systems. And many students on campuses, including ours, who sometimes report that they don't feel comfortable sharing their views, often, and many do, and many of those who identify as conservative report sometimes more nervousness about sharing their views, and I want to acknowledge that. But they often report that the biggest impediment is their classmates, and that's important to understand as well. And so, yes, we absolutely have work to do. It's really important work. I hope that gatherings like this are one element of that work and our commitment to doing that together.
And yes, obviously, I totally agree with my panelists. What happened to Charlie is a tragedy both for the Kirk family, who I'm praying for, and for our country. I hope it's not a bellwether of things to come, and I hope it's a wake-up moment for us all. I think it has at least two sort of obvious, to me, contributing factors. The first is, I mean, Doug, you listed out a lot of reasons to be depressed, and I think young people are. I think young people in this country, they feel like there's no hope. They feel like there's no chance they'll be able to live a life without debt, buy a home in a neighborhood with good schools, have kids, or do any of the things that human beings have tried to do for all of time. They're hopeless. And I think that the first, for me, real sign of this was actually not what happened with Charlie, but was actually what happened with the CEO of United Healthcare. You had people, young people, sort of publicly dancing on the grave of a dude who they never knew. And this was like sort of the first like bright yellow or red flag saying, hey, hang on, something's not all right. And I think young people have no hope, and I think that was the first evidence of this. And what we're seeing, not just with Charlie's assassination, but with the reaction to it, is that this hopelessness is really real, and it is violent, and it's dangerous. And I think we need to, this is the moment. There's not going to be a better time. Let's figure out what to do, and let's take it seriously. And then I think the second thing that stands out to me is that there seems to have been this really pernicious idea that has taken root largely on our universities, but broadly in society over the last few decades, which is that words, if they're sufficiently hateful, or I find them sufficiently offensive, can be considered a form of violence. And I think millions of young people today just believe that. It's just that is the reality. They do believe that if you're hateful enough with what you say, it is, sort of tantamount to being physically violent. And I don't know exactly how we can sort of deprogram that. I think sort of, when I was growing up, it was a bit, I don't know if you guys can tell my age, but it was a bit more sticks and stones. But that's not what people believe today in large numbers amongst our young people. And so we sort of have to fix that. Otherwise, I think we're going to go to a really dark place as a country.
The Knight Foundation did some really great research on this about 5 years ago. And they found that there was a tipping point that the majority of students, undergraduate students in America, believe that there are certain kinds of speech that should be sanctioned simply because it's speech.
Right.
That's true.
So just to stick on this for 1 second more, maybe this is a bit of a prickly question, but how much of to diagnose the problem, how much of this lays at the fault of the universities themselves? How much did they help create the system that we're now dealing with? I'll leave that one to anyone to pick up.
Cancel culture has always been wrong.
Yeah.
It's always been bad, whether it comes from the left or it comes from the right. And you'll remember a number of years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, everyone, all of our presidents were deathly afraid that Milo was going to be invited to come to their campuses. And it became he became a symbol, more even in sort of the same way that Charlie Kirk became. But it was it was a verb. You'd been Milo'd.
Yeah.
And we really didn't take seriously the idea that was an opportunity to do what we've been talking about, which is, excuse the word, to force people to confront ideas they were uncomfortable with, that they had a prima facie disagreement with, but to be heard. And so to the extent that universities allowed the heckler's veto to work, we really did contribute to the violencization of words and speech, to this idea that there's a line you can't cross, and surrendering the important curatorial power of the institution to use the Milo moment to teach.
I agree. I think universities have been a contributor. I also think some people point their fingers at universities as if it was all us, and we are also microcosms of broader cultural dynamics that get both produced within us but also brought to us, and I think that's important to recognize. I've tried to be very clear since my first day as Chancellor that when somebody comes to campus who you may vehemently disagree with, you have some choices. Those choices include going and attending and maybe asking a hard question. Those choices also include protesting, if you do it within our time, place, and manner rules and in ways that do not prevent the person from sharing their views with those who wish to listen.
Right.
Your choices also might include having somebody else come speak at the same time, doing some other programming with another perspective. But your choices do not include trying to prevent this person from coming to our campus or preventing them from sharing their message with the people who want to hear. I come out of law. I was a law professor and law dean before I'm here. I'm at a public university where the First Amendment regulates the limits of speech. And I think we have to be crystal clear about that.
Yeah.
I will say that the vast majority of students, faculty, and staff on our campus recognize that. And there are some who wish it weren't that way or who disagree. But over the last several years, we have, Charlie Kirk was on our campus a year ago, a couple times actually, once officially, once less officially. We've had all kinds of other speakers, and they have all been able to share their message with those who wish to hear. We do have collectively more work to do.
My view is, I think universities obviously are some of the most powerful institutions in our society, and we can do a lot of great work to fix this problem, probably somewhat responsible for how it got this bad in the first place. But there's just a lack of faith in institutions in general that our society is grappling with. The FDA, they let us have Red 40, which is giving us cancer. Nobody trusts them. The CDC, like COVID. It's like in general, I think there's a crisis of confidence in institutions. And the best way I think universities can adapt, and sort of colleges like us, two-year colleges like us, is to actually be places that facilitate the non-crazy version of these debates. Could there be a way to get the least insane person who believes issue A on side L and the least insane person who believes on side R, and actually facilitate them to have a conversation? And so instead of the most insane people, which is what the Twitter and Facebook and Instagram algorithms want to amplify because it's so addictive to watch insane people say insane things, and that's what they promote, we could actually have a sane conversation on some of these issues, because that's what's happening. Young people today are being radicalized by insanity because the social media companies make more money when they spend more time on the apps, and insanity is addictive.
Time to go.
So I want to double down on this to the following extent. I think that what's true is that we need to have more robust dialogue across differences where we are bringing a variety of viewpoints, but not necessarily we're trying to ignite the spark that will create curiosity, not necessarily trying to celebrate explosions. The First Amendment protects it all, right? Unless it becomes a true threat, but we do need to curate and make possible on our campuses pluralism, the idea that people with different ideas, different backgrounds, different experiences come and disagree and learn from each other.
We are public institutions, and that is a responsibility we have, and we have to embrace that responsibility. We can't let things, what happened to Charlie Kirk is just not acceptable in so many ways, right? And we can't have that on a campus. We can't have that anywhere. So what we have to do then is embrace the fact that we do have a role to figure out how do we look not just in the classroom, but how do we think more globally as a university. Everything that's happening on our campus, our resident halls, outside, when we're working with them to go to their jobs, when they're working with other entities, that's our responsibility to then think about how are they good citizens in general. And I think that's what you're hearing from a panelist, is we need to continue to double down on those things.
Yeah. Let me turn the corner on this one and ask you about, you mentioned the Harry surveyors, you talking about it earlier, right? Kids are really interested in being able to make a good living when they get out of school. That's where they're going. And there's a lot of concern that that's not going to happen. And the ROI is really uneven across the board, right? Who's going, how they're going, what they're studying. And I think that's probably been more important even than this issue of pluralism in terms of driving down confidence. Yeah. What are the steps that universities need to take to ensure that it is a good bet to go to college?
I'll start. So at UCF, we talk a lot about how universities need to change, and I talk a lot about the need for us to break down the barriers between industry, even government, and the academy, right? All of us have to figure out ways to work together. And in fact, I talk about the fact that there's a lot of institutions that I call really museums of tradition. And what we are is a startup with a mission. We're thinking about how do we change education? How do we make it that we have companies on our campus, and those companies, our students have internships in those companies on our campus, and that's part of the experience of being at the university. How do we make it that at a state like Florida, that our agencies at the state level recognize that we are a resource they can come to, and that they can actually think about how do they solve the grand challenges of Florida? So one of the things that was recently was founded by the legislature is the Florida Transportation Research Institute, which includes a number of our different universities. The problem is because we have so many people moving to Florida, transportation's a big issue. It's policy, it's infrastructure, it's everything you can think of. Those are, for education purposes, those are like perfect problems to think about because they're real. And so the more we can actually embrace that and say, okay, how do we get all of these partners on our campus working with our students, I think that's how you build the trust. We know students that are engaged are going to do much better. We know students who have that experience will get the jobs when they come out. We've seen the return on investment in terms of their salaries when they get their jobs, and we're committed to that. And I think we just have to keep pushing that, as strongly as we can.
It's not easy though, because this is one of the things that has a history that's long and deep. So universities were designed to be apart from society.
That's right.
That's why they have
That's
walls
right.
around
That's
them, right?
That's right.
Harvard Yard exists. Sorry, I wasn't going to talk about Harvard today. Many universities have a gate or a wall or something.
Yeah.
And within that, what's the central thing? It's a library.
Yeah.
Why is the library there? The library is the repository of knowledge. The university is the place where you huddle around all the knowledge that exists in the world, and then you go out and you do stuff.
Yeah.
This all day today has been an epistemological question.
Mm-hmm.
What is knowledge? Where do you get it?
Mm-hmm.
How do you know you have it? And how is it rewarded? Mm-hmm. And so I think what Andrew's saying is you got to kind of break into that and say, forget the wall, forget the library, talk about experience as one of the ways in which we learn important things. And let's start to give credit for the non-library work that students do.
Yes.
And let's make sure that we can label it, we can talk about it, we can measure it. Tim was talking about that earlier. But stop thinking that the university is the source of all knowledge. It may be the source of all teaching, but it is not the source of all knowledge, and I don't think it's even the source of all teaching. But so where do students come from? We were just talking about the students who come to campus who've been to community colleges. They have one kind of learning. They come from other institutions. They have another kind of knowledge. We accredit military learning, and so every joint services transcript goes through a machine in our basement, and we're able to assign credit to that. So you get people who come in with those kinds of credits. You get people who come in from the workplace where they have earned certificates, and that's the way we do it, Doug, is we acknowledge that people can learn important things in a variety of different ways and places. And the University of the Future, taking my last answer first, University of the Future is the place where we acknowledge that and celebrate it and bring it to life in a way that a student can take advantage of forever.
So powerful answers from both of my colleagues. In some ways, I'm the most traditional university on our panel, right? I mean, we've been around 177 years, and we aren't gated. We are open, and we live by the Wisconsin idea, which is the notion that universities should matter to broader communities and make a positive difference across the state. We've never been an ivory tower, but I think that originally that Wisconsin idea was a little bit, progressive era. We're from the university and we're here to help, and now it's much more bidirectional and engaged and messy. So we are more traditional in some ways, but we also feel that absolutely we have to earn our ROI, and I'd say a couple of things. First of all, yes, affordability is really important. At my institution, at a flagship public, nearly 2/3 of our students are graduating with zero debt. 2/3, right? And most of the students who have some debt have much less debt than they'd probably have to
Yeah.
take out for their Honda Civic, right? So it's, we also, our average time to degree for an undergraduate degree is about 3.72 years, right? It's less than 4 years. And we are hitting our all-time graduation rate. Our 6-year graduation rate is now just about hitting 90%.
Wow.
So probably these numbers are surprising to some people in the
Yes.
room, because the story of schools like mine isn't exactly that.
That's
correct.
And so that's part of why it's important to share. I will also share, this is, sadly for me, this stat is no longer true, but a few years ago, Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, was the school that had both the greatest number of Forbes 400 CEOs and the greatest number of Peace Corps volunteers. That's kind of cool, right? That's like two very different ways of existing in the world. I think now we're still decent at both, but I don't think we're actually number one, but you know, stay tuned. And we want to be places that are creating opportunities. We also recognize that the kinds of opportunities people are looking for vary. But what we should be is we should be transparent about the data and help students understand the likely consequences of choices that they make. I'm an evidence professor. That's like what I spent my life studying. And I believe that we should not be afraid of the evidence, including when it might show that there are issues with either debt or graduation rate or opportunities. So I think that's incumbent to all of us. But you know, we had more applications last year than we'd ever had in our history. So there are still large numbers of students looking for the kinds of experiences that universities like mine can offer. And we want to make sure that we're preparing them for a future that is complicated and where what it takes to succeed is going to look very different than it did 20 or 50 or maybe even 5 years ago.
That's amazing. And my, obviously universities aren't a monolith, and there are many different types of institutions with different institutional missions, but my somewhat contrarian view is that actually this is an amazing product. $11,000 in-state tuition to go to UW-Madison, a well-respected institution that's going to set you up for life success, especially if you're in that part of the country. I think we just need to get more students to have a UW-Madison in their state that they have access to. That's my I actually don't think that higher education is irreparably damaged. Far from it. I actually think with a few small tweaks, we can get back to the glory days of the American higher education system. I think the big thing is cost. I think we have to figure out how to make this the national story. In UCLA, for example, and a lot of us have a connection to UCLA, I know you two do. In 1995, does anyone have a guess like what the admissions rate was? 42%. 42%. That's like pretty great to go to a top state school in the country, in-state tuition, even less than $11,000. That's an amazing deal. You get the sports, minor league sports team. You get the you get the beautiful sprawling campus. You're going to make all the memories. Like it's a beautiful experience, and I think we sort of need to get back to that. And I think the question is how. How do we think about the cost structure so that every American can have access to a UW-Madison or a UCLA without taking on debt, or if it is, it's a small de minimis amount of debt from which they'll easily be able to get out from under because the employment outcomes are going to be awesome. So for me, I actually think it's like literally, let's get in a spreadsheet. It's like a very simple concept. Spend less than you earn. Radical idea, and don't overhire. Use technology to do the things technology is good at. Like I talked to institutions, they're spending 3 months and teams of 50 people trying to build the master schedule for the upcoming school year. That's insane. Computers do this instantly, right? And so let's be more efficient. Let's minimize administrative costs, and then maximize the amount we're spending educating students, preparing them for the workforce, and then getting them placed into great careers after they graduate.
Yeah. Sorry, I have to follow up on what he said. I mean, one of the things we did is we actually were pretty open about, if you go to ucf.edu/efficiency, we put all those numbers right out there. We show exactly how many administrators we have per 1,000 students. We talk about the fact that our tuition is only $6,400 in state.
Wow.
Right, and that is pretty remarkable. You can get a great education in Florida for a very low cost. Same types of numbers as Wisconsin in terms of the debt, people that graduate with no debt. There are great stories out there, and we've got to do a better job of telling them.
Absolutely.
You mentioned tweaks, Tade, and I'm thinking to myself, one of the issues that employers have with university degrees that they see now is that everybody graduates with a 3.82, right? I mean, grade inflation is so rampant. And the average grade given in American colleges now is an A-. But it's, paying customers, right? The corporatization of the university. How do you address that?
I think what we're doing is we're making sure that our students, Ted, we have to talk after, but our students, what is an A at campus or what is an A at any institution? You have to have some external benchmark. You have 5% of students who got A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's take some standardized sort of exam for the same content, Calculus 1 at campus versus Calculus 1 at ACE, and you have to actually see what the data is. And to your point earlier, it's about transparency. A lot of schools are not being transparent about this, and I do think the curving has gotten out of hand in many of our institutions.
So that pressure's not going to go anywhere. If I remember Princeton tried to unwind this a few years ago, and the kids weren't getting into graduate schools, is my recollection. So there's a cycle that this feeds. Transparency is great, but you have to break the cycle. How do you break the cycle?
So, for those of you who read The Atlantic, there's a great article by Rose Horowitz this week on how teacher evaluations ruined universities.
Mm-hmm.
And her argument is that there is over time there's been a compact created between students and faculty that if you give the students an A, they'll give you a great recommendation, and so that puts a stasis point in the machinery that, well, if I risk giving Jennifer a C, what's going to happen to my evaluation? And if I'm up for tenure, that's going to look really bad, and so on. There's actually a lot of truth in that. And so this idea of an external validation, I think, is really important. We've tried that. We've tried a whole undergraduate test to see what you know. It doesn't really work very well. I'm a big fan of mastery and competency-based stuff, so that the culmination of a course is not a test graded by a professor. It's either an experience or something that you have to complete to show you're competent at a set of skills that are embedded in the course. If it's a history course, it's one set of skills. It's a chemistry course, it's a different set of skills. But I think the way through it is to change the way we assess student learning. And by the way, I think AI is going to force us to do that anyway. And so I think that's one of the places where AI can help, is by creating competency-based simulations, experiences, experiments, where students have to show their goods in ways that aren't malleable.
There are examples of where that's worked, right? I mean, you have. I mean, although you can question some of these, but we do give bar exams, right?
Yeah.
Nurses have to pass an exam, and what we look at is what's the pass rate for our nurses compared to other institutions, and we're proud of the fact that it's 90-some%, right? Because not everybody's there. I think we do need something where we can standardize on how effective is this teaching beyond just grades, because I agree with you. The grades, we got to figure that out.
I agree. You have pointed to something that is a challenge. I will also point out that it's a challenge prior to college, right? We've seen a lot of the same dynamics at K-12, which also create some of the expectations that students arrive to university with. I used to be the dean of a law school, and one of the other elements that I will just make mention of here is that one of the important elements for a long time that U.S. News used in evaluating law schools was LSAT and GPA. And so that put pressure on law schools to take high GPA students, including in ways that we understood were pedagogically not necessarily ideal, because it meant that, first of all, if schools didn't have as much grade inflation, their students were potentially disadvantaged. But also, broadly speaking, some of the STEM fields have seen less grade inflation. And so we actually decided to build our own model. I was very interested in seeing more STEM students coming to law school, and so we wanted to try to protect against STEM students being penalized because of their likely somewhat lower GPAs. But that took intentionality and actually, if we weren't careful, a little bit of rankings risk, which was sort of nutty.
And they didn't use bar passage rates.
They did actually use bar passage rates as well as one factor, though California had a different bar cutoff score than almost every other state. It was actually just harder on the same test, basically, to pass the bar in California at that time, which was a kind of California state decision, and yet had impacts like this. So this problem that we need to measure, we need to understand, but also the things you choose to measure. Like, it's not crazy for US News to think that GPA and LSAT are relevant, and yet when they do that, whatever we choose to measure, it then does impact the way that markets operate. So it's a cycle.
One thing I'll also add is this problem is unfortunately already here, and it's already been exacerbated by the launch of ChatGPT and other large language models. I sometimes sit in on interviews. I sat in on an interview the other day with a computer science graduate from a top school in the country, and I will tell you my jaw was on the floor, and not in a good way, the entire time. This person clearly vibe coded their entire degree and did not know basic programming principles. And I actually think somewhere, from 2022 to 2020 to now, bachelor's degrees in a lot of areas don't mean what they used to anymore. And I think the light, because we're supposed to be wrapping up soon, let's make it positive, is that AI can be used to get way better at assessing real competency than we've ever been. And on the teaching side, we can actually, there's been adaptive learning for a long time, but not really. It's actually here now. We can actually assess every student, figure out what specific prerequisite deficiencies exist, and then plug them one by one and help them develop mastery in a way that just was not possible pre-large language model. So that's the positive sort of response as well.
Well, let's end on a forward-looking note. So we're at this crossroads. Who knows how we're going to get through it? But what do you see in 5 or 10 years that universities will be doing or not doing differently than where we are today? If you could start, Alex.
Well, I have a lot to say about this, so I'll try to figure out how to keep it simple. For me, I see, like I said, we're going to have campuses that are geographically dispersed. And the reason for that is because I think people learned through the pandemic that online is not necessarily the answer. I'm going to tell you that. It isn't. I think people learn more from each other. And so we're going to be figuring out how do we give the convenience to the people that attend our universities, and the convenience is given by distance that they have to travel to actually get that education. So we're going to have to think about geographically dispersing. We're going to also have to think about how we integrate industry onto those campuses so that people are there working, doing their jobs at the same time that the faculty are teaching the students. That is a future that I believe will actually benefit society, but also benefit, of course, the students who come to us the most, because they're going to learn how to work in such an environment. They're going to actually learn beyond just the classroom. They're going to be interacting with leaders in industry and in the academy. There was a time when a lot of the knowledge and all of the leadership in developing new technologies was in the universities. That time period has shortened so much now that you see it exists in industry, it exists in the academy. And so how do we bring the best of both worlds together? I think that's what you're going to see. In a very simple view. I have a lot more to say about that sometime. But
So, quiz. What is the most profitable part of the Harvard University enterprise?
Endowment.
Endowment, yeah.
No.
No, nothing.
Executive education.
Executive
Ding,
education.
ding,
Oh,
ding,
profitable.
ding.
Yes.
The most profitable is the extension program. The Wisconsin model started with an extension program.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I see a merging of the traditional university with what we marginalize by calling an extension program and focusing on education as a lifelong project. And by the way, the market is showing us that. That's what this says, is that people want more education beyond whatever they got. And so we need to capitalize on that. And the way to do that, and I mentioned it before, is to understand that learning happens in a variety of different locations. So the university should be a convener, the university should be a collaborator, and a university should be a curator of educational experiences that come from a number of different places. They then certify those as qualifications for X, Y, and Z. And X, Y, and Z are better than the proxies that we have today. I have an economics degree. What does that mean I know? I could make it up. Tade could make it up. But we have so many proxies that we need to get behind. And the way to do it is by smaller bites of information, validated and collected by this thing we call a university.
So 5 to 10 years is really a blink of the eye.
Yes.
I mean, there'll be lots of new things, but it's also just not really a very long period of time. I would like to believe that universities will be doubling down on some of the civic discourse, viewpoint diversity engagements that we've talked about, such that the slight turn positive that we saw in some of this year's data of who's trusting us have begun to more dramatically shift in ways that recognize the value, that we both are changing and that the value of what we're offering is being recognized in that space. I think there will be more stackable credentials and different ways in to university experiences and opportunities, though I do think that the 3 to 4 year residential experience is still transformative for a fraction of people out there, and that's okay. It's not the answer for everyone, but neither should we hope that it goes away. It can be a wonderfully transformative experience. I also hope universities have been in close partnership with the federal government going back to just about World War II for research and scientific discovery, and that has produced enormous innovation and prosperity and intellectual leadership for this country. I hope as we look ahead in areas ranging from drug discovery to quantum to so many other places, I hope that's at least as true in a decade as it is today. And I think that for us to continue to be that, we have to find ways to grow transparency, but also continued partnership with the federal government, and also double down on some of the interdisciplinary and cross-disciplinary spaces through which some of the most exciting discoveries and opportunities will likely be found.
No, I totally agree with, I think, the general panel. Specifically what Ted said is kind of what I was going to allude to. I think my hope in 5 years is not that much time in this world, for better or worse, but I do think that it would be great if there's a lot more consolidation of enrollment within schools like UCF and UW-Madison. I think ASU, not to heap even more praise on ASU, which already gets a lot, but I do think they have demonstrated a lot of innovation, and specifically that it's possible to grow enrollment, have a strong balance sheet, and still be a prestigious R1 institution.
100%,
And I think that, rest in peace, Clay Christensen wrote about this. I wish he was around now to sort of give us some guidance on all this stuff happening. But he wrote about this in the Innovative University, about how every institution effectively in America was trying to replicate the Harvard model. Right? The hedge fund, the minor league sports team, all the things. And it's like actually what's actually I think much more needed is the UW-Madison, UCF, UCLA, the big state schools whose brands are sort of very old, well-respected, the outcomes are just consistently there, and are, I think, generally ranked amongst the top institutions in the country for ROI. And I think that's where young people want to go. I do think the residential campus experience still has a lot of value. I had a great time for us, for sure. And my hope is we can just make that super accessible and affordable.
Terrific. Good. Well, that brings us home. Guys, thank you very much for taking a few minutes to...
Thank you.